What's good? It's Woog. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. We've got Conor Benn, 18 wins, 0 losses, taking on Adrian Granados, 21 wins, 8 losses, 3 draws, and 1 no contest. So boxing fans across the pond are a lot more familiar with the Conor Benn story than most American fight fans, but if you are unaware of the historical significance of Conor Benn in the fight game, he is the son of former middleweight and super middleweight, 160 pound and 168 pound champion Nigel Benn. Nigel Benn had won the WBO middleweight 160 pound title back in 1990, and then he defended it once successfully, knocking an aging Iran Barkley out in the first round. Iran Barkley caught an aging Thomas Hearns and beat him back in the day. But Nigel Benn won the WBO middleweight title, defended it, then lost it versus Chris Eubank, who has a son, Chris Eubank Jr., who's currently campaigning in the middleweight and 168 pound divisions. So Nigel Benn lost his title to Chris Eubank in 1990 via 9th round TKO, and then he goes up in weight, he being Nigel Benn. Nigel Benn wins the 168 pound WBC title, and he actually defends that one successfully several times. So one of those title defenses was also a title unification fight. So Nigel Benn put his WBC belt on the line, and guess who he meets 3 years later? Chris Eubank. And in this rematch, the result is a split draw. So Nigel Benn retains his title, Chris Eubank retains his title, and they both move on. Nigel Benn defended that 168 pound WBC title successfully 9 times. You know, one of those title defenses was the iconic fight between he and Gerald McClellan, an all-out war, an absolute classic that unfortunately resulted in permanent brain injury for Gerald McClellan. He's been having a really difficult go. You know, one of his main advocates and helpers has been Roy Jones Jr., has stepped up and played a big part in Gerald McClellan's life and trying to just ensure some decent quality of life for him. So props to Roy Jones Jr. for that. But yeah, Nigel Benn, one of his title defenses was that classic against Gerald McClellan. Defended it successfully another couple times, and then finally lost it to Tulani Malinga. And then he fought Steve Collins twice, lost both of those. So Nigel Benn ended his career on a 3-fight losing streak. But 2 division champion, his son Conor Benn is working up the welterweight rankings as we speak. He's still very, very young, only 24 years old. And in his most recent fights, he's just started to step up in class, opponents-wise. So, you know, a couple years ago, this is June 2019, he fights Jussi Koivula, and that ended up being a TKO, second round TKO. Very impressive showing, even though he got pelted. Conor Benn got drilled by a few right hands early in that fight, and I still think he's susceptible to right hands today. But he beat Koivula, and in doing so, he earned one of those lesser continental European titles, which he's now defended successfully a couple of times. In November 2020, in his first fight since the pandemic started, he fought Sebastian Formella. You might remember Sebastian Formella was Sean Porter's COVID-era fight. That's basically Sean Porter's only fight since the Errol Spence showdown. And Formella is one of these very durable guys. In fact, that decision loss against Sean Porter was Formella's first professional loss. And since then, Formella's fought Conor Benn, and Conor Benn beat Formella via unanimous decision. And it was one of those fights where Conor Benn looked super explosive and strong early, and it was just drilling Formella, where you're watching the fight, you're saying, I can't see this one going the distance, but it did go the distance. Like I said, Formella's a very durable fighter, never been stopped. His only 2 losses, again, are to Porter and now Conor Benn. And even in that fight against Formella, I kind of saw Conor Benn's susceptibility to the right hand. And it was also apparent in this fight and against Koivula that Conor Benn isn't a big welterweight. He has like a 68-inch reach, right? So that's under Errol Spence's 72-inch reach, Terrence Crawford's 74, which is very long for the division. But Conor Benn kind of has a Sharmba Mitchell build where he's kind of muscular. He's not very tall. He's about 5'8". So maybe Shane Mosley height. And Shane Mosley wasn't very tall for the division either, but Shane Mosley had out of this world power, at least as a lightweight, still kind of carried to 147. He had some knockouts there. But Shane Mosley also had like electrifying hand speed. I think Conor Benn throws combinations well, but he doesn't have that just special hand speed. He's not slow by any stretch, but it's not like outlier quick. So you couple that with his smaller build for the division, and you can kind of, foresee him having certain issues. But one thing I will say, he looked good against Formella, and again, it was important that he won that COVID-era fight. And then in April of 2021, just a couple months ago, he fought Samuel Vargas, who's now fought Errol Spence, Virgil Ortiz Jr., and Conor Benn stops Samuel Vargas in like the first 90 seconds of the fight. Like first minute and a half, Conor Benn smokes Samuel Vargas. He just looked brilliant when he was throwing those combinations. He looked like he was hitting very hard. He's a very scary first round fighter because he's got a beautiful jab, a hard jab, especially in the early rounds, and he could turn the jab around into a hook, which is probably his most devastating punch, his left hook. He's an orthodox fighter, so he's got a very popping jab, and again, a beautiful left hook. He'll throw the right hand, and sometimes the right hand in conjunction with the rest of the combination is one of the punches that led to Samuel Vargas's early demise in this fight. But I feel like the right hand only works as a companion to the left hand. Again, Conor Benn loves to throw these kind of mid-range combinations, and it just worked beautifully against Samuel Vargas. He crushed Vargas way more authoritatively and quicker than either Errol Spence or Virgil Ortiz Jr. So that was a very impressive outing for Conor Benn. And if you're Samuel Vargas at this point, you got to be looking at the exit, I would think. Samuel Vargas, by the way, has also fought Danny Garcia, Amir Khan, Luis Collazo. Definitely a win-some, lose-some guy, and anytime he's truly stepped up in class and fought the elite or near elite, he's almost always lost, and usually by stoppage. But this is Conor Benn's first fight since the Samuel Vargas destruction, first round destruction. And this time, Conor Benn's taking on the very tested, pretty durable, at one point very, very competitive Adrian Granados, who is, like I said, 21-8 with 3 draws and 1 no contest. The no contest was a weird fight against Javier Fortuna, where Fortuna fell through the ropes and like hurt his shoulder, had to be carried out of the fight on a stretcher. But the first time I really paid attention to Adrian Granados was when he fought Adrian Broner. This was in 2017. Actually, I remember watching Granados a couple times before that. One time was actually a win against Amir Imam, but a couple fights after that impressive win over Imam via TKO, Adrian Granados fights Adrian Broner, and that was a very competitive fight. In fact, as I'm watching the fight, by the time they went to the judges' scorecards, I thought that Adrian Granados might have edged Adrian Broner. But they gave Adrian Broner the split decision win. Super competitive fight. And it really made Adrian Granados look like a kind of a litmus test. A not just shy of a gatekeeper, but definitely somebody who you could see the other rising talents maybe test their skills against to see if they could truly be elite. Adrian Granados kind of assumed that position with that super competitive fight versus Adrian Broner. In fact, his very next fight, his being Adrian Granados, was against Sean Porter, and that was a very competitive fight. I think Sean Porter actually broke one of his hands in that fight, so some of the punches that he wanted to let go of, he had to kind of pull back on or not throw as authoritatively. But Adrian Granados, a pretty rugged type of fighter, somebody who likes to kind of stay on you, could take a good punch, likes to let his hands go, and just likes to kind of outwork his opponent. He's not, he doesn't pass the eyeball test in terms of being like just out of this world gifted. There's nothing that's just going to wow you physically about Adrian Granados, but it's his pace, it's his competitive nature, his competitive spirit in the ring. You can kind of feel his heart and desire in some of these fights, and the fight against Sean Porter was another example of that. It was a very competitive fight. Sean Porter, in this case, won by unanimous decision. So unlike the Adrian Broner one, this one, all 3 judges went to Sean Porter. Again, I thought that Adrian Granados could have won that fight against Adrian Broner. So after the loss to Porter, Adrian Granados has that weird short fight against Fortuna where Fortuna falls out of the ring, and then Granados goes on to win the next couple fights against lesser opponents, and then he stepped up in class again versus Danny Garcia, and this time Danny Garcia actually knocked Adrian Granados out. Now, that's not something that we've been used to seeing. Again, even in Granados' losses, he had gone the distance and fought very close fights. In the case against Danny Garcia was more or less winning most, if not all of the rounds up until the point of the knockout. And, Danny Garcia, even more so than Sean Porter, even though Sean Porter beat Danny Garcia is one of those more sharpshooting guys where he'll time it right. And if he hits you with that left hook or a punch that he's really setting you up for, like his fight against Brandon Rios, he could get you clean out of there. We've seen some spectacular Danny Garcia knockouts, including that one that kind of put him on the map after, well, I guess the Eric Morales one put Danny Garcia on the map, but it was his knockout win against Amir Khan that really had us, eyebrow raised about Danny Garcia. So Danny Garcia knocks Adrian Granados out. This is 2019. Granados then fights a decision loss against Robert Easter Jr., then fights Arturo Herrera, beats him via early TKO. That's another lesser tiered opponent, less quality opponent. And then he fights to an 8-round majority draw against Jose Sanchez. So, coming into this Conor Benn versus Adrian Granados fight, I really have some questions in terms of where Adrian Granados is in his career trajectory. He still, fights pretty competitively, wins some, loses some, but he's been fighting some really good opponents in recent years. So he's been losing a lot more than he's been winning lately. He's 31 years old, so he's not necessarily like an old fighter, but, fighters age differently. Some of them could fight until they're 40 and still be competitive and beyond. And some fighters, look pretty shot by their early 30s, even late 20s sometimes. So 31, don't let the age fool you. I feel like because Granados has been taking on tough opponent after, going the distance with Sean Porter, whose health could that be good for? So, I feel like the surging, much younger Conor Benn at this stage of his career is entering this fight at the right time and catching Granados at the right time. I don't even think this is, nearly the same Granados that fought that super close, disputed split decision loss against Adrian Broner, because that, again, was 2017. This is 4 years after that. He's had 4 losses since that. Well, 4 losses counting that, and then a draw. So Conor Benn is really the A-side fighter here. DAZN is building him up. Again, he's got a famous, father in Nigel Benn, especially in the UK. Pretty much a former household name. You know what I mean? So he's carrying on the legacy here, and I expect him to look very impressive against Granados. Now, Granados likes to mix it up in the same range distance-wise as Conor Benn. They like to kind of, be up on each other, but I think Conor Benn likes to maybe a little bit more space so he can let his, punches go to where he's catching you with the right part of the left hook. And again, I keep on saying this. I feel like Conor Benn is susceptible to an overhand right hand. I've seen him get caught time and time again. He is kind of shoring up his defense a bit, but he still drops his lead left hand way too much. Like, of course, it's tiring to keep your hands up like this for long periods of time. And sometimes when you drop your hand, the punch coming at a different angle makes it easier to hit the opponent. When Roy Jones would always drop his hand, he would throw a hook. They wouldn't see it because of the trajectory. So I get the offensive reason why you would want to drop your hand sometimes and for preserving energy. But it also makes you much more vulnerable if you're not on your P's and Q's timing-wise. You either have to roll with it, which I think that Conor Benn's getting really good at as well. He's getting caught less cleanly. But now, as he's going to start working up the tier level in opponent quality, these are things that you can't really afford to slip on. So I do feel like he's going to get a comeuppance, and somebody's going to really put it on him with the right hands and people who are more durable and better in the middle to later rounds. I think that Conor Benn tends to slow down big time, and I think that a lot of the pop off of his punches starts to decrease. So if you look at the rounds that he knocks his opponents out in, it's always round 1, 2, or 4. It's always in that range. He's not getting late knockouts, and he is winning unanimous decision, but I do think that his power decreases. So I think that there are people who are still much better than him at the welterweight division, but he is showing promise. I think he's got some, he's got professional level skills and, just physical attributes. Like I said, he's not super fast, but he's certainly not slow. He's obviously hitting hard as hell. And I think that that power is going to do him wonders in some of the fights that he might not be the more technically sound fighter. But if somebody is going to test him with that right hand that could put him on his butt, I don't think that it's Adrian Granados. Not now, at least, but I do think that he's going to get some rounds. I think that he's going to stop Adrian Granados late. Adrian Granados is going to be, I think, pretty durable. He might even win like 2 or 3 rounds. You know what? Let me modify that. I think that Conor Benn is going to win, but I don't think he's going to get that elusive late stoppage against Adrian Granados. I think that Adrian Granados, his durability is going to wane. And I thought that the Danny Garcia knockout loss was kind of a turning point. But Danny Garcia, again, I think is still a special puncher. And Danny Garcia has shown that he can hit hard late in fights. I think that Conor Benn's going to win this one via decision. I think that Adrian Granados is still going to be durable enough to where if he survives the first 2 to 3 rounds, because there is a chance that Conor Benn could smoke him out early because of how devastating he is in those first couple rounds. Both, again, powerful jab. I'm going to look out for that freaking pipe of a jab, but the left hook. I think that he's going to try to throw some combinations to really hurt Granados. I think Granados is still going to be like rugged enough, durable enough to survive those early storms. And I think that he's going to take him the decision. But please, let me know what you think about Conor Benn. Let me know. Check this out. In the welterweight division, if you look at how things line up, all of the power in the division is with PBC right now, right? With Errol Spence and Sean Porter and Danny Garcia, Keith Thurman, and you name it. But when you look on the DAZN side, it's like slim pickings. But they do have Golden Boy's Virgil Ortiz Jr. If Conor Benn wins this fight and Virgil Ortiz Jr. beats Mean Machine Kavaliauskas, I get why they wouldn't do it, because you want to build these guys up and then make bigger fights and then make those fights that matter happen when there's more money on the table. But I feel like because of Conor Benn being, of this, lineage of famous British, fighters, his dad, the history there, and then you've got this surging talent who a lot of people already want to see Virgil Ortiz Jr. in there with some of the divisional elite. Why not do Conor Benn versus Virgil Ortiz Jr. on DAZN? It just seems like it would make a lot of sense. But yeah, let me know what you think about Conor Benn versus Adrian Granados. Who do you have winning the fight and how? And how do you see Conor Benn? And I'm saying unless Adrian Granados pulls up a big upset, which again, he could be very competitive in certain fights. And if he can still fight as well as he fought against Adrian Brunner and Sean Porter, he can be in this fight. But let's say Conor Benn wins the fight. What would you want to see on his agenda for the next year to year and a half, 2 years? Let me know in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.